Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's session, introducing new pricing strategies to offset cloud and AI costs. My name is Alex, and on behalf of the whole PPS team, thank you for being here. We're here today because innovation is expensive. Cloud costs are climbing, AI workloads, are exploding, and finance teams are asking tough questions about profitability. The companies that stay ahead are the ones using pricing as a strategic lever to balance innovation with sustainable margins. We're fortunate to have two fantastic speakers with us today. First, Paul Bland, Senior Director of Technical Product Management for Revenera. Paul has more than 25 years of experience in software engineering and product management and currently manages a team responsible for delivering product innovations that helped Revenera customers monetize over $50 billion in annual revenue. Joining him is Philip Daus, partner at Simon-Kucher and head of the Houston office. Philip has led more than 100 pricing and commercial excellence projects worldwide, generating over $5 billion in enterprise value. He's a frequent speaker at international conferences and has published over 50 articles and teaches pricing at leading business schools, including IE Business School, Rice University, and the University of Houston. We're in for a very valuable discussion today. And with that, please join me in welcoming Paul and Philip. I'll now hand the stage over to them.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Welcome, everybody, to this Revenera and Simon-Kucher webinar. We're going to be looking at pricing and packaging strategies that you can use to offset some of the costs that cloud hosting of your software and incorporating AI capabilities is driving. To set the scene and just to repeat what Alex just said, can you go to the next slide, Philip? I'm a product manager at Revenera. We serve the global software industry, which is currently valued at somewhere in excess of $1 trillion. Revenera produces software which helps companies monetize some $50 billion worth of that software annually. As a company, our focus is and we see our opportunities within this global software market to include monetizing the fastest growing sector of SaaS and hybrid transformation within software, but also helping digital transformation within device companies who are still making the transition from monetizing pure hardware to monetizing the software that runs on that hardware, but also supporting our customers who have a very long tail of on-premise software, which is not going anywhere very soon. Next slide.
And it's a 1 minute pitch on SK. So we're a strategy consulting firm, about 2,200 employees, 46 offices. We've been around for over 40 years. Originally, we started as a pricing boutique, and to this day, we're the leading pricing consultancy worldwide. We conduct about 1,000 pricing projects every single year, more than any other consultancy globally. And as mentioned before, I'm a partner with the company. I've been with the firm for 21 years, based out of Houston, Texas. And very excited to kick us off. In terms of what we're trying to accomplish, we've kind of three goals here for this joint journey. One is share some trends around software pricing, SaaS pricing that we're seeing. Second, introduce the concept of token-based pricing or credit-based pricing to you all. And then last but not least, share how to actually implement such a token-based pricing approach using Revenera's technology. What you see on the left is the youngest addition to my family, and you can see the German genes there. He's Texan, but obviously he loves cars and he likes to run around naked. So that's a bit about us. And Paul, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to begin by looking at some of the software monetization trends, which are really forcing a focus on these new pricing models. No surprise, the software market is growing. The fastest growing stratum of the software market is subscription for SaaS applications. You can see there in the middle of the graph, that is the main part of growth. But nonetheless, subscription to on-premises software is also growing. And at the bottom, we see that license and maintenance by which we mean perpetual license sales, still form a not insignificant part of overall revenue. It's declining, but it's still present, and it's going to be present for a long time. With the growth in SaaS software and the consequent hosting of that software in cloud services, suppliers of software are inevitably facing cost pressures from the spend that they're being faced with in through those hosting environments. And what that's doing is creating an imperative for software producers to look at their whole monetization strategy and to adopt new initiatives that are going to help them to continue growing their revenue, but also to remain profitable. And the kinds of things that software producers are having to look at is, how do they manage hybrid environments? SaaS rarely sits on its own. It's usually in a hybrid context with device-based or desktop-based software, and that needs to be managed in a coherent way, which preserves profitability. Reconsidering packaging and pricing regularly is also a need which we are seeing very regularly with software producers, in order to respond to changing perceptions of what customers derive value from, but also to look at buying habits and to see how the trends that have been seen can be used to maximize revenue. Next slide.
Yep. And I just want to put this in context, Paul, due to the fact that we have very different kind of monetization models currently sitting within companies. This slide essentially shows economic value capture by type of monetization model, but it's at the same time almost like a summary of what has happened in the software and SaaS space over the last 25 years or so. So beginning of the 2000s, most software companies had a basic on-prem model. It's like a one-off transaction, and they started to dabble maybe a little bit in vendor managed services to bring subscription pricing to the market. And of course, with the advent of cloud-based solutions, all of a sudden subscription-based models were all the hype, and you had kind of like a more predictable long-term revenue stream, and fantastic impact also on multiples of companies. So that took on, and then consumption-based pricing came at the end of the 2010s, somewhat impeded by COVID, of course. During COVID, a lot of solutions had zero consumptions, and of course, if you're sitting on a subscription-based model, you're in a certain advantage. And that's a little bit also the explanation why we have a lot of hybrid models in the marketplace. If you have subscription-based pricing, but you want to move towards consumption-based, a lot of these folks use a hybrid approach. What's now, of course, with the advent of AI, but even previously, kind of the latest and greatest is what's called outcome-based pricing. True outcome-based pricing is still super rare. What we see more and more, though, are kind of work-based monetization models. So a few examples on the next slide. Salesforce, at the beginning of the year, they introduced the concept of, for Agentforce, of charging per successful conversation. So successful meaning that either customer says, I'm very happy with the result, or there's essentially an end of the conversation and no need for a follow-up. So that was charged by $2, was the first time we had something like a industry benchmark for a work product. Even Up is also very interesting. It's a AI powered solution that targets insurance companies, or rather injury law firms that prepare essentially all the demand letters that then go to insurance companies. They essentially charge by demand letter that's not just drafted, but then is also accepted by the defendant. Still a work output model. If you go to the right, charge flow, that is an automated management solution that ultimately helps with the chargebacks from e-tailers, and they ultimately only get paid if their customers get a successful chargeback. They charge a 25% commission. You can kind of see like from kind of work output to outcome-based pricing, how much is being charged actually also goes up substantially. So very interesting models.
Yeah, at Revenera, given that software producers are looking for these new and novel touch points that can be monetized, we're seeing a move in what we now call monetization services, what we've called licensing historically, a move from pure licensing, which was about enforcement, to looking at licensing as something that provides access to capabilities to end customers, and to be able to track that access at its various points in order to monetize. And that's led us to what I think of as a multi-dimensional monetization approach. And this diagram tries to illustrate that, where at the top you have your traditional approach of simply controlling access to software at the device level. With the advent of SaaS software over the last few years, that's increasingly led to a focus not just on device, but also the user access to software. So the primary point of monetization is who gets access to the software. That's increasingly leading to a blend between device and users, where the user is the primary focus, but some control is exercised over where the software can be run, what devices, how many devices. And with the advent of consumption pricing, which has been talked about for years, but is really coming to the fore, you get a blend of these three, where consumption-based pricing interacts with device access in order to provide ad hoc access to the software to cope with some of the peak demand problems that have presented simple concurrent licensing over the year. And concurrent licensing also interacts with user-based licensing to provide variable cost monetization for things like high-performance compute offload, API access, AI, as we're talking about today, anything which not only has a variable cost element, but also presents new value opportunities, which can themselves be monetized.
And if you currently use a seat-based pricing approach and say, hey, Paul, hey, Philip, we're good with that. It's working just fine. The news for you is, of course, that a seat-based approach ultimately is putting your revenue model at risk, right? So with the advent of AI, you have a lot of processes that will ultimately require less human support, from augmentation to automation. And ultimately the implications are that the number of seats that are being required for any given software will likely come down in the future. So there's a lot of pressure currently on seat-based models that kind of drives also this move towards outcome-based models, or in the very least, consumption-based pricing models. The other thing is, of course, with AI solutions, there will be more a need to also account for the costs to make AI work. There's this discussion that, hey, LLMs are getting cheaper and it's going to get cheaper by 10x. Is this actually the case? This is an analysis that I got from Kai Poyar, Growth Unhinged. Very interesting. He just literally plotted current price points of different Gen AI solutions. And what we're seeing here is that, yes, the older models are getting cheaper, but to keep up with the Joneses, ultimately companies are investing in the latest edits. And of course, they're not necessarily getting cheaper. And of course, also customers are using AI significantly more. So we have to counter these increased AI costs also with a monetization model that reflects that, and seat-based pricing just doesn't do the job. Now, in comes token-based pricing. This is a statistic we got from Gartner that essentially said that by 2027, so in a couple of years, 25% of most customers' net new spend will come from token-based models. I think that number is substantially understated. based on our projects. So currently about, at least a third, but more like half of our projects have some type of token-based element to it. And you see that also when you look at the big incumbents in the software space. They might not call it token-based pricing. You see some examples here that they might call it generative credits, AI credits, or actually dollars in case of Cursor. But these are, make no mistake, different forms of token-based pricing. In this case, they're used to monetize AI. And also different approaches to this. Half of them are cost-based. The other half are already trying to have some type of outcome-based metric in their setup. Currently, the prevailing rate, again, set as a benchmark by Salesforce, is about 10 cents per AI action. So token-based pricing already is a thing. And if we say, what is actually token-based pricing? This is actually something that has been out for at least the 21 years that I've been in this industry. And I explain it to my kids with the Dave & Buster's example. So at Dave & Buster's or Chuck E. Cheese, any of these formats, you buy a card that you can then fill with chips or with tokens. And then you can use these tokens for different applications. So you have skeet ball, 9 balls per player. You have arcades that's typically pay for minute or pay per minute approach. And you also have lots of games that are, there's a price per game. So as you can see, very different pricing models that can be, or different pricing metrics that fit under this concept of token-based pricing. So one level up, it's a upfront commitment. It's a monetary commitment that gets transferred into these tokens or credits. And then a different amount of token is necessary for different types of services. And there are two things here that are actually very interesting, make it very interesting for us pricers, and also introduce a little bit of complexity. One is that there's a possible multiplier. So it's not $1 per token, but there are different ways to actually convert dollars into tokens. And there's the concept of wastage, which we'll cover a little bit later on as well. How do you actually deal with wastage and create, on the one hand, upsell incentives, but on the other hand, also make sure that your customers are happy with the structure of the model the way it is. To the multiplier, really quick, the idea is if you have 3 activities that require different types of credits or different types of tokens, in order to raise prices, you can, on the one hand, increase the price per token, but more interestingly, you can actually increase the number of credits or tokens that's required to buy this activity or to buy this service. So for these 3 activities in this case, you see an increase of 20%, one of 0%, and one of 50%. So it's ultimately the price stream, thinking of price differentiation in a much more granular way without necessarily having to jump through all the hoops that you have to do with a regular price increase. Yeah, and there are some consequences to this as well. And then maybe one more comment from my end. Typically, these models work particularly well when there's a certain level of transparency with the customer or with the consumer. So these are kind of 4 examples here: best in class, Salesforce, Klaviyo, Matterhorn, and Snowflake. All use different forms of online tracking, of token usage, of current spend, and also different triggers to then sell additional token or credit packages to customers.
It's described situations in which software producers who incorporate AI into their applications provide credits for charging for that AI. You'll also have seen that the AI providers themselves, who provide the underlying capabilities, provide tokens for your ability to use AI within your application. Is issued, they're charged when a response is given, and you have to pay for those. Revenera's token mechanism allows you to charge tokens to your end customer, issue tokens to your end customers, and consume those tokens as they make use of your AI capabilities. The Revenera tokens are multi-purpose. They can be used to monetize anything within your portfolio. And so a common use case is to perhaps provide a package which entitles core functionality within a subscription, within a base subscription, but then to incorporate a certain level of AI activity or a certain number of AI credits, which can be provided via some Revenera elastic tokens. And then also to be able to provide the ability for your customers to pay extra if they consume all those tokens, so that they can then continue to use your AI capabilities. Revenera's elastic access can be applied in other contexts than just AI consumption. So we've seen use cases where a subscription might be issued to an end customer and then tokens issued for access to software across a portfolio. And what that does is allow your customers to try out your software by paying for them with tokens to get a taste of the software, or if there's software they only use occasionally, to get ad hoc access, or to provide tokens for the periods of time during a subscription cycle where they run out of licenses, they need extra access to the software, and they can fill up that headroom simply by consuming tokens for software access. Can you go to the next slide, please, Philip? So this graph illustrates this idea of having a lease capacity of subscriptions, but then having a token capacity that allows your customers to use that software over and above their lease capacity at peak times, so that they can then operate at the pace of their need, rather than be limited by the level of their subscriptions.
And then maybe 3 comments on things to watch out for as you think about implementing token-based models. The first one is that of wastage that I mentioned before. So what do you do when customers actually don't use all the tokens that they bought within the given time frame for which the tokens are valid? So first solution, the simplest one would be just a full rollover. Very customer friendly, also incentivizes larger purchases. However, typically, it creates some undesired side effects. For example, that you ultimately have customers that might game the system and get undesired volume discounts as well. Also, just revenue recognition gets really, really tricky if you don't have clear kind of timelines in which consumption must happen. What we see very often are partial rollovers. So either a portion of tokens or credits can get used, but not all of them, or there's some type of fee that has to be paid in order to reactivate all of them. Again, has a few benefits. Might be very complicated to roll out and implement in some cases. And then last but not least, it's kind of use it or lose it. The hardcore version, of course, that would incentivize right sizing tokens, but it could also lead to customer dissatisfaction. So that's one piece. The other one is with regard to overusage and overage. So meaning customers actually use up all their packages. What happens next? So the one way would be to essentially say, hey, your contract already ended because you used up all the tokens. Let's just start a new contract. You could also have a true up. So customers ultimately is back charged at the end of the original contract, typically at a premium. So there's an overage fee, or additional token packages can be offered, typically also at a premium. And kind of how those things are structured, there's a lot of kind of love that has to go into the details to make all these work.
Yeah, one of the things we see, Philip, is that decisions about what to do in relation to wastage and overage are really the complicated part of deciding how to implement consumption. Once those decisions are made, the technicalities are relatively straightforward, but there's a lot of discussion that has to take place up front between product teams to decide what's going to be done about these issues. Not getting those decisions right early on really does lead to complications later on, and problems with respect to customer relations and their sense of whether they're getting value from what they're paying for.
Yeah. And there's no one size fits all, right? So kind of what the right solution is depends a lot. For example, on purchasing cycles, depend on like who the actual buyer is and how decisions are being made on your customer's end. So yeah, there are different elements that need to get considered here. One last comment here on just broader implementation, because we just talked about the actual token piece, but of course you have to do your homework in terms of what are the right packages. Very often token packages get bundled together with different types of functionalities, product functionalities as well. What's the right price model? As you've seen in the beginning, all these incumbents have very, very different price metrics that they use. Again, one of the attractions or the attractiveness of token-based model is that you can have different metrics living under one roof, but you still do have trade-offs between creating rather complex model to explain, also for your sales force to explain to customers, versus have a very simple, straightforward sales motion as well. Of course, price level questions. That's why you all are experts in pricing. And then when it comes to migration, typically that's kind of like the parts that get somewhat neglected. There needs to go a lot of planning into how do you migrate existing customers into those new pricing model? What incentives do you provide, both internally but also externally to your customers? So what are carrots to make them migrate? What are sticks that you can bring to bear in order to get customers into these revenue models? And last but not least, everything around customer success, right? So the different customer success teams inside the company, but then of course also different systems and the software and all that good stuff that Revenera brings to the table.
Okay, so how do you go about doing this in an operational way? How do you go about implementing consumption and token-based monetization? Revenera have introduced in 2024 a new service called dynamic monetization, and one monetization model within that service we call elastic access. We introduced this because we recognized that token-based consumption pricing was becoming more and more of a need for our customers, and we wanted them to be able to blend this with traditional ways of monetizing using concurrent licensing and user-based licensing, so that all these monetization capabilities could be achieved under one roof, so to speak, without having to go and build the infrastructure. Our customers having to go and build the infrastructure themselves. So elastic access is a way for our customers to be able to sell metered tokens to customers, and those tokens can simply be exchanged for access to any kind of item at listed costs. Those items could be products, features, capabilities, resources, and added cost capabilities like AI. Software producers can, within elastic access, set token prices for each item they offer. And as Philip said, the token cost per item is those token costs are defined in what we call rate tables. And an example of the rate table is there on the right. And I've illustrated it in terms of AI capabilities. So an AI request, an AI response, maybe firing up or spinning up an AI agent, maybe providing an MCP call to an external agent. You could even list in here outcomes, successful resolution of a support ticket, for instance. These rate tables are somewhat decoupled from your price book. And what that means is that you can make immediate pricing and packaging changes just by adjusting the tables, adjusting the rates within the tables. And those adjustments can be scheduled for some future point in time. We hear producers say that mid-term, an increase in prices isn't very popular. very often you might use it to reach out something during a cycle, and then maybe during the next purchase cycle you can introduce a new rate table which resets the prices so that customers know at contract point what they're buying into. This service also provides real-time and granular usage data to really get immediate feedback on what's happening with your customers. Can you move to the next slide, please, Philip? Right, so just click through. So the process is that your customers buy a certain number of Elastic tokens. That might be as part of a bundle that they buy as a subscription, or it might be just a standalone purchase of tokens. Our Elastic service immediately knows what tokens have been purchased, and then applications on the network can make requests for access to any item that you choose to put into your rate table. The Elastic Access service will calculate the cost by looking up the quantity requested, looking up the rate, doing the multiplication, deducting the tokens right there and then sending a response back to the application so that it knows that consumption has taken place. That data immediately goes through to our data warehouse for you to access. I'm going to keep speaking. I think I'm breaking up. For you to access through analytics to provide feedback to your sales teams, as well as reports to your customers, and to feed data through to your billing system.
I can still hear you, Paul, but it just comes to confirm that AI is difficult and AV is impossible, right?
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether I could be heard then. I could see my image flickering, and I carried on speaking. So I'll just repeat. So the real-time data has at least 3 applications. It provides feedback to your sales team in order to get some data they can use to understand the value your customers are deriving from their consumption. It can also be used to produce reports that can be fed to your customers so that they can exercise some kind of budgetary control over what they're doing. And then thirdly, the data can be fed straight through to your billing system so that if you operate a post-paid model, then the billing can happen on a schedule that you choose.
Yeah. I will just add, I know your software can handle all the creativity that pricing folks come up with. Of course, the crux lies in defining what are actually the items that we tokenize, what are the metrics that we're going to use for each item, and then also what should that cost be, right? So that it's not a cost plus, but a truly value-based approach. And that's typically once that's all prepared and ready to go, the software does actually the miracles there.
That's a really interesting point, Philip, because we often talk about cost, recovering the costs. But if we miss the fact that customers derive value from these capabilities and that every point of value is an opportunity for monetization, then we're really missing the opportunity. And so, I believe the focus should be on monetizing the value. Keep an eye on the bottom line, preserve the profit margin, but to grow revenue, we've got to monetize value. So I mean, this is one of the main use cases that we see helped with our Elastic Access. Our customers are faced with a threefold challenge. They struggle to provide premium features on a pay-per-use basis. They have runaway AI and compute costs, and they're leaving money on the table for high-value features. The benefits of Elastic Access is that it's a very generic consumption mechanism for charging tokens. Rapid adjustment of token rates can be achieved through the rate tables. Customers can regulate their expenditure via accessible data and rules which govern consumption. And tokens can be used to monetize anything in the portfolio. They open up cross-sell opportunities. And another graph on the next slide. I like visuals. For me, this illustrates that your fixed subscription costs with a level subscription revenue is no longer eroded through your variable costs. but is enhanced through variable revenue that you get through consumption pricing.
Yeah, this is pages just to illustrate. If you currently sit, for example, on a regular seat-based pricing model, maybe with a little bit of consumption-based, and say, hey, we really are interested in getting a bit more complex and developing a better monetization approach overall. How long does it take to actually not just develop it, but then implement it in the field? And of course, consultant answer here would be depends on a lot of factors, but we've done this in 7 months together, right? Because you can start working on the system side in parallel as you're developing on the solutioning. So within 2 to 3 months, you can have the strategy regarding the office structure, regarding the packaging approach, regarding the revenue model, and also kind of the build out of the different token elements. You can have those ready, and then start with migration planning, thinking about incentives, performance management, all the good stuff that ultimately helps to make a new pricing strategy stick. And while that happens, Revenera can work on getting the data to kind of start setting up the different use cases and the policies, system designs, and starting to set the overall software up to make things work. Paul, any comments?
No, I think this slide, other than this slide, really presents the interactions that we can have in a very kind of creative way. Revenera, we always position ourselves to sit squarely in the quote to cash process, and I think what this slide illustrates is how we can work with customers who are considering a new pricing model to help them to use software which will avoid them having to build and then maintain their own systems into the future.
And then maybe just to sum it up, some benefits, but maybe also some potential disadvantages of a token-based or credit-based model. So it allows to combine different revenue models, different pricing metrics under one umbrella. I hope this came out very clear from our discussion. It also, and maybe we didn't spend too much time talking about this, but it also helps to incentivize the trial of new features, right? So if you buy tokens and you can use them for whatever you want within a given software, you can adjust the price levels, the token price levels for different features and actions to then trigger trial of new customers and in that sense, help with cross-sell, help with upsell. And last but not least, there typically is an element of churn reduction as well, because customers commit upfront. There's an upfront commitment. Of course, that has to get paired very smartly with the way that you work with overages and wastage, and ultimately how you renew contracts as well. But those are the 3 key benefits. Some of the disadvantages also mentioned the complexity. So you still have to explain the product. You still have to explain how it works. However, just given that all the incumbents are currently working on token-based models or have implemented them, I think we've seen a much higher acceptance of these models in the marketplace already. The other thing, the tricky part, and that's solvable, is that the usage of the products can be very difficult to predict. So for that, you typically do market research, and there are different kind of tools to calibrate the model adequately. And last but not least, as mentioned before, there's some significant changes from an operations standpoint that are required, but that's why we're giving this presentation together. A lot of the heavy lifting is actually going to be done by Revenera, so it will make your life significantly easier and the go-to-market significantly faster as well. And go ahead.
Philip, I was just wondering, to what extent do you see these disadvantages being a consequence of it being a new paradigm? Or do you think these disadvantages will be there forever?
as I said, I think a lot of it has to do with the newness of the concept for SaaS companies, but that's very rapidly changing, particularly when it comes to AI monetization. So pretty much every company is thinking of a way how to make money with AI. And that inevitably leads to the discussion of token or credit-based pricing, because the use cases of AI are so varied. So I think the industry is shifting. What still remains, though, is this complexity question, right? So is there a benefit of being fast in the market, grabbing market share? We've had this discussion actually this week with the company said, look, we have all these companies that we bought up. They have all their offerings, and they're rather complex, but the kind of smallest common denominator is seat-based pricing. And our main goal right now is we want to grab market share. So should we just stay on seat-based pricing because our sales reps know how to do it, our customers know how to buy it? We just have to deal with this cost thing somehow. But there's this notion of, what's the right level of complexity that's good for a company internally, but then also good for reps to go to market. So it's a bit of both, but I certainly see there's some change in the market towards the openness of discussing these models. Okay. And again, your kids know token-based pricing quite well from their last Chuck E. Cheese and Dave and Buster's visit.
Of course, yes.
All right. I think that's what we wanted to share. And Paul, unless you have any other comments, maybe this would be the right time for any Q&A. And Michael.
Yes, that sounds great. Yeah. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Paul. I am keeping my eye on the chat, and I would encourage anybody who has questions to ask them. Quick introduction. My name is Michael Goff. I am Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera. Philip, because I'm a marketer, I will have to say, your last slide about benefits versus disadvantages. I wouldn't say disadvantages. I would say challenges or considerations, right? Those are all things that folks really need to really think hard about, because it is so new. But I don't know that I would call them a disadvantage. But having said that, I do have a couple of questions for you guys as we're waiting for folks to chime in the chat. And Philip, maybe this is a question for you. What's the mix look like with respect to sort of combining subscription and consumption-based models? Are there any trends that you're seeing in vendors trying to find the right balance, or is it really vendor-specific, market-specific?
No, the majority of our clients, they sit on some type of hybrid. Again, typically it's subscription with some type of consumption-based metric. And particularly driven also by all considerations regarding AI, right? There's this famous metrics that you'll find also in the latest publication, Scaling Innovation, shameless plug here. But we kind of looked at the impact of AI. So there's AI augmentation of activities versus automation. So if you augment you're not necessarily replacing folks, then there's more a leeway to stay with the seat-based pricing. If you start to automate, of course, you have to move away from seat-based as fast as possible and have some type of consumption-based metric. Likewise, what is the impact of AI? Is that measurable? Is that tangible? Can I define a business case, or is it rather warm and fuzzy? And if it's tangible, just like in the case of charge flow, for example, then put a hardcore metric on a commission basis, for example. If it's a bit more warm and fuzzy, just like in the Salesforce Agentforce interaction, there's a customer call that can be all types of things, and the value is hard to quantify. Then use some type of hybrid. That's typically where we would land.
And Paul, I know you spoke about getting some of that usage data to later on adjust your rate tables. But question for the both of you: is there a crawl, walk, run approach that you typically will recommend to vendors who want to get started with tokens or consumption-based pricing? Is there a natural starting point, and then how do you see that evolving or recommend?
I mean, from our point of view, we see customers who have employed the use of firms like Simon-Kucher and have therefore benefited from some analysis up front. and can perhaps hit the ground walking at any rate with some kind of pricing model already formulated. There are other customers who are starting from scratch, and we have discussions about simply implementing the token consumption, but just giving the tokens out and seeing what happens. So just trying to generate some data up front, because without data, you cannot make any decisions. And then you gradually feather in the ability to charge for it. You find the kinds of activities which are widely used, but you get a sense of them not being chargeable. And then you see functions which are used, they clearly represent value that you can then monetize. And you gradually lead in with some pricing, with some actual pricing and some requirements to buy tokens. And then, some customers talk about a blend of that, of these two things. So you buy some tokens, and you may be credited with some free tokens for doing something like filling in a survey, just to incentivize customers to use those tokens and get used to the whole experience of a pay-as-you-go approach rather than a all-you-can-eat situation. Philip, I don't know whether you've seen.
We have a lot of customers that read somewhere outcome-based pricing is the way to go, and in internal sessions they get very creative as to how to actually measure outcome, how to kind of quantify outcome. But the challenge very often is that it just can't get tracked. So actually finding the data internally to track that customer specific outcome becomes very hard. So that crawl walk approach in between is some type of hybrid that is not yet outcome. It is work based, because yes, I can track my work product. I cannot track customer outcome. So that's typically an in between step that a lot of folks go. And likewise, from a little bit of complexity to a lot of complexity, that's also typically something that evolves over time, right? So you don't create like 30 different pricing metrics in one go and try to explain it to a customer. It's rather you start with less, with the most important ones, you try to get customers accustomed to the new revenue model, and then over time more complexity gets added. That's typically a crawl walk one approach.
Philip, I think you anticipated my next question. What's your experience been with your clients when it comes to trying to identify and define what the outcomes are that will be a charge event? Is it a really difficult target to hit? I assume there's a lot of iteration that happens, but are there any specific types of usage data that you're using to help inform the creation of those definitions on outcomes?
So again, that I'm going to answer with a consultant. It depends, right? But typically we would want to look at usage data, internal usage data, and based on that, see if it's permanently trackable and how we can also play this back to customers. As mentioned before, this one slide on best practices, communication is really key. So a customer who has no access to or visibility into their consumption of the credits, they're invariably not going to be very happy with the model because they don't know what they're going to get charged for. So you have to find that data in-house to then bring into a format or in a shape that you can play back to customers. And that typically is one of the biggest lifts that we are seeing. Very often the data is just not in a state where you can massage it a little bit and play it back on a one-to-one basis, but to automate it, that's typically one of the key hurdles.
Great, thanks. And obviously a great reason to call you and your friends at Simon-Kucher. So there's definitely been a lot of talk about prepaid versus postpaid tokens or credits. Are you seeing any trends with respect to markets where one is more prevalent than the other? And does it really depend on sort of the vendor-customer bargaining power dynamic? Or is it something else that's driving the decision to be okay with a postpaid, which customers tend to prefer, versus a prepaid, which vendors tend to prefer?
So there typically has to be a trade-off between, I pay up front and I expect some type of discount versus I pay ex post. For token-based, typically it is an upfront payment and you get access to tokens. We've seen models where you have like quarterly tokens or even monthly tokens. None of that seems to make too much sense. So typically it's a move towards an annual type of subscription. And then the other piece that's typically crucial is just capping the validity of the tokens. And, is that validity one more month into the new year? Is it kind of a rolling average? Is it a full year? Like those are the questions that ultimately then depend on the industry and how purchasing processes work and all that good stuff. But the default is like annual tokens that can partially get rolled over with some type of penalty or some type of trade-off, and providing incentives, financial incentives to, for cash payment, early payment, all this good stuff.
Thanks.
Michael, you and I have had conversations about this, that producers much prefer the prepaid model. They don't want to have an after the event discussion to recover revenue or to charge back. We hear that end customers prefer the postpaid model simply to defer the payment, although that creates budgeting uncertainty as well for end customers. But it also depends, and I think Philip made this point a little earlier. What do you do when a customer runs out of tokens? Do you turn the lights off? In some contexts, that might be okay, but not always, particularly where the application is providing mission critical capabilities. You simply can't stop providing the service just because somebody has no tokens. And so you end up moving into an overage scenario. Once you're in an overage scenario, what do you do with that? Do you then charge the customer back? Do you send them a bill? Or at the next renewal, do you true up based on the tokens that are purchased, replenishing what was overused in the previous year? Overage is a useful data point as well, because if a customer sees that they're going over with tokens, then that actually gives an upsell opportunity for the next purchase.
Those are exactly the right questions that we also encourage our clients to ask as they define kind of the guardrails for such a system. Again, like best in class, for example, would be that you track internally usage of your customers and you don't wait until they run out of tokens, but there's a forecast that says, dear Mr. or Mrs. Customer, most likely in 2 months you'll run out of tokens. How do you want us to handle this, right? And then you have also more flexibility. It could be I buy some additional packages, or we just start a new contract. So very often it's a combination of the options that I discussed in the presentation. But again, like that discussion has to happen before you implement, not kind of when you're there turning lights off, as you called it, Paul, and that's not going to create happy customers.
Yeah. Philip, I have a question for you. When SaaS was growing, a lot of producers were clamoring to introduce subscription, and subscription revenue had a very positive impact on company valuations. What are you seeing emerging around the way company valuations are being affected by the introduction of consumption pricing?
Unfortunately, we're still in a world where investors are not always sure. So moving from a subscription-based pricing to an outcome-based pricing model doesn't always mean higher multiple and better valuation, right? So I think from on-prem to SaaS, that was quite apparent. You go from on-prem to SaaS, hey, multiple goes up, and there's also from the financial institution perspective, a drive towards getting companies, hop on that subscription pricing bandwagon. And outcome-based pricing it is a bit more varied. I think generally it's viewed favorably. Some companies see substantial boosts as well from the investor world, but not every company. It depends again on how is it being implemented. Do the metrics actually make sense? Does there seem to be a holistic strategy? Or in the worst case, they're implementing metrics that, just like seat-based pricing, ultimately revenues go down, where the transition could imply a revenue loss, not a revenue increase. So there's some nuances to this to get it done right.
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your expertise today. Obviously, we're hearing a lot from vendors about rising cloud costs, rising AI costs, how they're going to deal with that, maintain profitability. Yes, we're still relatively early days in this. There are considerations and challenges to consider, but I appreciate the fact that you've laid out a path for folks to follow to lead to success. So with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So thank you both for joining us today. And thank you in the audience for being here. And Alex, I'll turn things back to you.
Thanks so much, Michael, Paul, and Philip. It was a great session today. We absolutely appreciate your time. And I think that's it for today. I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
All right.
Thanks,
You
all.
have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you.